Hello, and welcome to this video on Tricentis Tosca. With Tosca, we automate all technologies, from mainframe to mobile and everything in between. So today, let's have a look and see how our customers are using Tosca for their mainframe testing. Tosca automates based on the technology with which you're interacting. So wherever your mainframe is hosted, we can automate this by interacting with the UI, such as a terminal emulator, or non-UI, such as files, databases, and APIs. But let's focus on the terminal emulators today. Tosca has a host engine for these emulators and settings for different types of emulators. So how does this work? Well, these emulators don't have the standard properties. So Tosca identifies these fields by attributes. For example, the label on the left is used to locate the field itself, like we can see here. Or, since these emulators are generally static and have fixed screen size, we can use the field coordinates to identify these fields and still use Tosca's model-based automation to reduce maintenance, even if there's a change. As you can see, the test cases are still in plain English, and we can use the same actions, such as input, verify, and buffer, etc. And this even works for more complex screens, such as tables or combo selections, as we can see over here. So now let's see a demo on how this works. Okay, so now we're looking at my desktop, and you can see I have Tricentis Tosca installed, and I can use it to do my automation across all different technologies. Today we're going to focus on IBM Perscom, so I'm going to fire that up so we can have a look and see what I'm using. And here it's launched. If I click on that, you can see here's my mainframe application. It's a publicly hosted one. I've logged in, and I'm accessing it through my IBM terminal in this particular case. So depending on what emulator you use, we'll change different settings, and then Tosca can automate through the UI in this case. So what I've done to start off with is I can automate this whole section over here and tell Tosca to enter the details for the host and the port and connect. But what's actually simpler is if you enter all that and set that up once, you can actually save that as a pub file over here, .ws, and then just tell Tosca to launch that, and that saves you having to enter all of that and automate that, and it makes it a little bit faster and a bit more stable. So that's always something you can do to help speed up some automation time. So I've got 3 examples to show today. An existing automated test where we're going to run through this IBM terminal, enter some data, navigate through a job, watch it run, wait for it to finish, and verify the results in a number of different controls, and then again in a table at the end. And then we're going to create one new from the beginning so you can see how we automated all these different screens. And I'm going to use a more complex one with the table. And then I have one more example where I can show you how we can use a single field in a module to automate all the different fields on a screen so that we don't have to create a module with a field for every single field that we see, because sometimes there might be 20 or 50 and we're only interested in a few. We can dynamically change it in our test, and we don't need a module for every one of these pages with all the different controls. So that's going to be our examples we'll look at. I'll close that down for now and open up my Tosca session. And here I've labeled it. You can see I've got run end of day batch job in my terminal emulator. And here's my 3 examples. My existing one. I'm then going to jump over to our modules and create a new test and a new module. And then I'll show another example of using one module with one field to automate multiple fields. So let's start off with number 1. We can see over here, the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to start my IBM terminal. So I've already saved my instance, so it's going to launch that different pub.ws file, and that saves me having to enter that details and make it a little bit more stable from that side. Then I'm going to wait for that certain field to be true. Sometimes it takes a little long, so you can see we can automate those different fields as well. But in this case, I'm just using that module to wait for that field to exist and be true, so that if it takes a little longer, depending on my environment, Tosca will wait. Now let's have a look at the actual automation. So here's my test case with all my different fields. And what I'll do is move that to the left, just so you can see an image on the right. And I'm going to bring in my image field over here. And now we can see, as I've automated my application, there's the different screens that relate to my different test steps over here. So we're going to log in. We're going to buffer the environment details. That's the first instance. Then we're going to enter some credentials, my username, my password. You can see it's all hashed out over there. And then the next step, if I jump to that one, is we're going to do some navigation. So we're going to navigate to number 3. That's the command at the bottom. There's a field over there. We're going to open jobs. It's all the same field. As we go through, we can use the same one over and over. And when I jump to this one here, you can see that's number 2. And then we can come to this field here. And this is where whatever environment I saved on the first screen, I'm going to verify that it's the same one on this screen over here. So we use the buffer function to save it, and we can verify it later by recalling that buffer over here. So I'm going to collapse that one now. Here we have a nice loop where if your job is running, whether you kicked it off or whether it's running, we can tell Tosca, keep hitting the refresh button, the F5 button, and keep looping. And here's my condition. And the condition is while this is in progress. So while the status in this column and this table says in progress, and we'll have a look at that a bit later, keep hitting the F5 button. Once that condition is no longer met, it'll exit that loop, and we can simply verify that the job status has changed from in progress to DEQW in this instance. So let's now collapse that loop and collapse the verify. And then, of course, we'll just exit the job and exit back to one of the menus over here. So you can see we've gone through all these different screens, interacting with different types of controls, including tables, and it's all done using our model-based automation. Still business readable, even though it's terminal emulator. So I'm going to now just do a right click. I'm going to run that so we can see how that works. And once that's finished, I'll go through and actually create a new module so you can see how I created all that from the beginning. But now the first thing we'll do is Tosca will launch the actual emulator. You can see now it's launched, and now it's going to switch over and say, okay, now let's wait for these fields to be enabled true. And once that is, it'll carry on and then jump over to the actual UI of the screen and start interacting. So it entered the data. It's going pretty quick here. And you can see it's entering, navigating through the fields. Here we enter the loop in a second over here. It's going to verify that it's saying while it's in progress, keep hitting F5. It's only going to do that once because this job's actually finished already when we actually enter the screen. So it hit F5 once and then it exits the loop, and then it verifies the same screen is correct. And then it exits back to another menu, which will be my starting point for a bit later. So you see it went pretty fast. So it's just like using our standard automation in Tosca. If we have a look at my scratchbook here, you can see all the different actions it did, and it entered my loop and it repeated once. So it went to the screen, it hit F5, and then the condition was not met because it had already changed from the status. So you can see there, the status is no longer in progress. So then we did my verification and then exited at that point. So quite a simple example, but we did touch quite a number of different controls along the way. And what I'd like to do is show you how we created that. I'll give you a quick view of our control flow diagram, which is nice to see when you introduce loops and conditions. And there's some settings here where you can make it equal width. You can center it as well, just for readability. When we enter loops and conditions, it's always nice to get a view here from a business perspective saying, I'm entering a loop, I'm hitting refresh while this condition is true. Once it's no longer true, exit that little loop and carry on. So there's my control flow diagram, which Tosca automatically creates based on my test as we go through. So let's jump back to here. And now that was my first example, and a working test. Now the second test we'll do, or the second example we'll do, is jump over here to my modules. Here's all the different modules my test already used. You can see we have one that logged in to the actual screen. And if I move that across, we can see all the different controls. We've saved the environment variables over here and we verified it later. But there's a module that represents that screen and all the other screens you want to work with along the way. You can see there's one working with active jobs, and there's a table a bit more complex, and that's the one I would like to create for you now. So what we're going to do here is we are going to collapse that. There's all my modules from beginning to end, but I'm going to create a new one so you can see how that works. And what I'll do now here is navigate manually back to that actual screen. And so I'm going to click onto my field there, hit the 1, and we have the page that I want to actually automate now. So what we do is we go into our module section over here, into an empty folder, and we tell Tosca to scan. This is a scanner for more modern apps. What I'm going to use my legacy desktop scanner, and it's the same concept. We still create models, but this was our older scanner that we used for older technologies like Mainframe, Gupta, Power Builder, and all of those. So slightly different, but the concept is still the same. We still tell Tosca to scan our application, and you can see if I hover over it on the top left, you can see the host engine appear over there. So we're going to scan it, and it'll go and find whatever controls it can, and we can always change that a bit later. So my scanner is now running in the background, and in a second we'll get a pop-up wizard that finds all the controls on the screen. So here's my scanner, and it's come back now, and what you can see is all the different controls that Tosca has identified for my mainframe emulator here. I won't need all of these, of course. I can pick and choose which ones I want, and it's just used its settings to find different fields. But if you have a look here at the bottom, if I click on that one, you can see it's got coordinates, and in this case, if I move that to the left, that's this field over here. So it's identified it by coordinates, and I can click mark, and you can see there's that command line over there, which I can create and use pretty much in all the different screens to navigate around. I did that before, but I'll show you that again as well, how we create that. So at the moment it's identifying by coordinates. I can change these to attributes, and what you'll see if I do that now, it's using the left label. So it's using actually that text over there to find that field over there. So I can tell Tosca, okay, let's use the label on the left to find the actual field, or I can use attributes, or I can use coordinates. And as you can see, default over here is coordinates, but I can switch back and forth depending on what I want to use. So I'm going to grab that one there, just so you can see how easy it is to create those. And what we also want to do now is we want to create a control for the actual table. So if it's just entering data, we can simply click on the actual field like we did here. We can adjust the coordinates as well if we want, depending on what field we want to use. And you can see here, if I was interested in only a few different lengths, by here, by default, it's chosen 75. Again, if I click on that, it's grabbed the whole field. It's just using a little bit of intelligence that it has. But if you say, I'm never going to go over, say, 2 to 3 characters, I can change that to 3. Click on that, and you can see it's reduced it. So it's completely up to you how many lengths you want to add, and you can change it according to the actual field. That's generally how we would do all the fields themselves, no matter where they are on the screen. If you want to add a table, you can use one of these existing ones, or you can add a new one. So if I click add, I can actually create a new control altogether, and you can see it says control no name found. And I can come over here and rename that. And let's call this my jobs table. Okay. And again, we can say mark on screen, and you can see it's just chosen the last one down there. So now we need to change that, of course. So how do we change that? So first thing we need to do is find the coordinates. So we need to find what are the fields length for this particular table. We need to know, as you can see, the column, the row, the length, and the height over there. And I'll move this slightly over here so we can see all of them. So first thing I want to do is say, where's the table going to start? So in this case, you can see if I click on there and come to the bottom here, it says 9 and 2. So 2 is the column and 9 is the row. So we can actually tell Tosca that the row is 9 and the column is 2. Let's delete those ones. If I do a mark, you'll see now we've got that entrance over there. Now I need the height. So if I click back to here, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Could count them like that, or I could use maths over there. I'll use just counting because that's easier for me. And the length. So again, I can mark it, and now you can see it expanded it to that area. So now I need the length. And of course, here you can do the same. In this case, if I click over here, that's probably the end of my table over here. So it could be that one there. It could be there. Since there's a header, I might actually want to grab that. So it's 69. And I know the beginning one over here is 2. So I'm just going to deduct those 2 and say I want the length of, for example, 67. And I can just test it out and see if it's right. And there we go. I've got the right length as well. So now Tosca knows where the table is located on the screen. So that's generally all you would need to do if it was just a field. But now, because it's a table and there's a lot of data in the table, we want to add some additional controls. So I actually need to tell Tosca, okay, it's not just an edit box. I can actually change it now and say, so you can see we've got combo boxes as well. And I'm going to go to table. If I click on table, again, it's got the same value. You can see we've got a new tab now that says table content. So if I click over here now, what you'll see is a bunch of data. So it's found all that data. But now what we need to do is tell Tosca what are the columns of and the rows, so that we can, when we comes to the module, we can steer it like a normal table, and we can be dynamic, and we can point using the columns and rows. We can identify data, and it doesn't matter where they move on the screen. We can still use Tosca standard table steering to identify that. So what we'd want to do is jump over here now to the actual attributes over here, and this is just to give you a preview. There's different properties over here that we can also verify at runtime if we wanted to verify colors and things like that. All this information is available if you want to do that, like we have a standard Tosca. But if I jump back here, what I wanted to get to was these table properties over here. So we've got the area, now we want to choose the table properties. So we need to tell Tosca what's the first line of data, and we can say, for example, row 2. And already now if I switch over here, you'll see it push the first line of data up to the header. So now we know, Tosca knows that's the header. Don't look for data there, but we can use that header as well to drive the actual automation. And now we need to say row height and column length as well. So the column start, the row height would be 1. They're all kind of 1 character, 1 length. The column is where we need to actually add more now. So now we can actually tell Tosca, okay, based on the actual field coordinates here, I can actually say my first column, for example, is the first column in the actual table. So here you need to remember that we're not using 2. It's the first one out of that defined area that we defined over here. So it's actually 1 is the first set of data over here. And then what we can do is, based on all the other information that we have on the different columns that we want to steer, we can actually then tell Tosca, okay, these are the other tables, the other columns, and we can just add those values. So I've done that ahead of time just so that we don't have to, so you don't have to sit here and watch me work that out. And basically if I say, for example, 6 over here, and all I did was, by clicking in here, is finding out what is the actual column and minusing 1 off it, because 1 was the actual starting point over here. So I've worked that out already, and I'm just going to type them all in. The next column starts at column 29, then it's 33, then it's 39, then it's 46, then it's 62. So let's see if I've done that right. I can jump to my table contents, and you can see straight away it's pushed all the data into the correct format. Now we've got data all in the right place, status, all the different statuses, and we have all the other data just by defining the header itself. And obviously the opt over there is that one over there. We might want to enter value into there, or do a X, whatever it might be. So Tosca now has all the information it needs to interact with this jobs table, and we have another control over there. But again, any other data you want, if you wanted to verify this date, for example, over here, if I click on that, you can see there's a date, and I wanted to just verify that one there. That's actually grabbing the text to the right, so I could actually just change that to the right coordinates and verify that from that side. Let's see which one it is. It might actually be this one. Mark. There we go. There's my date. You can rename them in either place, but this one's a bit easier. And now we have the date. So we could verify the date, for example, at runtime. And then let's click away, and now we've got the date. So that's my 3 controls I've selected over here. In this particular case, I can now create my model, and that's the same as any other model now. It'll tell me there's no technical IDs because I'm using coordinates, and that's perfectly fine in this case because these screens are generally static. You can come over here, open up Tosca, and what we'll see in here is we have a new table. Session A, of course we can rename that to IBM table as an example. And again, you can drag and drop and use that in a test. So I'm going to drag that from there and drop it in the end here. And this will be my test. So I've got my test case here. I've got my test step over here. And oops, I actually dragged and dropped that into my existing test. So let's move that up one and rename that. Now we have a step that just verifies. So we can use it the same way we did before. If you remember over here, I actually used and I verified data in that table. You can see we verified the status and the job. Again, I'm just going to copy this over here, but basically what we've done is we've said go to the column status. The condition is there's another column called subsystem. There's a row called job. Subsystem job, and the row is queue batch, and we want to verify the value in status is correct, for example. So we're using the column and the row and the cell over there that we want to identify, but this is the condition to get to the actual cell that we want. So I'm going to use the same one there. And you can see if I come to jobs, for the classic technologies, we have to open this up using an actual action. So in this case, it's verify. We know the status, the column is status. The condition is subsystem equals QBatch, and I'm going to jump to my system just so you can see. So we're going into the status. We want to verify that subsystem is QBatch. So that's the condition it's going to use to find that particular row. But then we've already told it that's the column. So that's the cell we want to verify. And we want to verify that it's DEQW. So if I come over here, say DEQW, run that again, that will now pass with the correct value because we're just verifying that for this column and row over here, going across to the status that that value there is correct, and that's DEQW. So that's run, it's passed in this case, and now we should see a green, and there we go, it's a green, and it's actually found the correct value from that case. So now you can see how we can create modules for tables and normal controls, and these are probably the most commonly used ones over here. The last one I want to show is what happens when you have a screen with so many controls. We don't want to add every one of those controls to a model. So what I'm going to do now is tell Tosca over here to navigate out of that table. And I've forgotten where the navigation is myself. So what I'm going to do is jump back here. I'm just going to drop that image to make it easier to read. And based on my endpoint, I'm going to exit, and I'm going to enter programming menu over here, and this is going to get me to the screen that I want to get to, which will have a lot of different controls. And so Tosca's just going to exit there, go back to the menu that I wanted to, and then go back in and enter the correct options to get me to that programmer menu over here. So here we go. Tosca ran all that for me. So what I want to do now is, let's say you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different fields on this table. And this is probably an easy example because some screens have a lot more than that. I've seen screens with 20 to 50 different fields that you need to interact with. And obviously we don't want to create modules for everyone. So the way around that is basically, if I come to my example here, which is our final one, is how we do that is in Tosca. If I jump to the modules, what we can do is we can create a module, and I'll call it generic field, and I'll have the name input field over here. So we already saw how Tosca identifies these controls, and what I've done here is I've created a module that can be reused over and over. And the way I've done that is I've just called it something generic like generic field, input field, and if I click on that and bring up Tosca's properties, what we see here in the value is instead of having the coordinates in the module like you would generally do when you use the scanner from that side, it would put all the coordinates here in this little area, in this my area property. What I've done is I've pulled that out. I've said, you know what, let's drive that with a buffer. So that way at runtime, I can tell Tosca, this is the field I want, and just provide the column, the row, and the length. The height's generally always 1, so we're not going to change that. But this is a nice way to dynamically drive the model and the field without actually adding hundreds of different fields to my model. So that's what I've done there. My buffers will actually drive the location of this field. Bring that back to normal. That's what I've done, one field, and what you'll see here is if I jump to here, I'm going to tell Tosca is I've got 3 different fields. I haven't done it for all of them, just 3. One's called enter selection, enter param, and enter type. And what I'm referring to there is selection, parameter there, and type. So the first 3 over here. So rather than adding 3 fields, I've just added 1, and I'm going to dynamically steer that field. And what you'll see is I've got enter selection, and I've got 2 different actions in each folder. So what you'll see here is if I open up, let's try this one, you can see I've set buffers at runtime. So at runtime, I'm going to say is if I want to interact with the second one, I'm going to set my buffer row to 15, 53, and 10. And that will basically tell me that for parameter, if I click on there, it's 15, 53 in that case, and then I want the length of 10. So I can just obviously work that out as well, how long the length needs to be. And then When I do that, then Tosca will set that. It'll write to its temporary memory. And now this field, if I jump back here, is using those parameters that we saw, that we've set now at runtime, to locate the actual control on the screen. And I can do that as many times as I need to. I can change the actual coordinates at runtime, row, column, length, and then enter test over here. Same as here, I'll change it to something slightly different, 16, 24, 10. And I think that's the next one here, 16, 24, and length 10. And then I'm using the same generic field. So I'm using the same module over and over, the same module to buffer over and over, and dynamically just changing that at runtime. And I've done that 3 times for selection, parameter, and type. And what that means now is I can actually select these 3, all using the same single module, but dynamically changing at runtime. And Tosca will now interact with these different fields. In this case, it's just doing inputs, and I'm dynamically changing the actual location for each step before it actually starts, and it sets it there. So you can see we started off there with selection 2, test, and type over there. Test 1 and test 2. And that's the values I had, and I didn't really open them up. So you can see that there's 2, there's test, and there's test type. So those are the 3 examples, and hopefully you can see how Tosca can automate with different mainframe applications. Of course, this is IBM PersCom. There's a number of other terminal emulators we do work with. We just need to change some settings, and then Tosca can talk to those different emulators that you might have, like Roomba and all the other ones out there. So thanks for your time. I hope that was interesting to you.